That's a good question. Certainly the NFL had that problem and instituted something known as the Rooney Rule, which I'm sure you're aware of, that one of African American had to be interviewed. And I think it's, again, you could see people saying that's a quota, that's, we're just setting this up. But it's had some results, and it's had some good results. Yeah, I would say yes. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. Do you know the numbers? It's not good. I mean,
no, I can't remember the numbers. I know it's severely low because ever since the Rooney Rule, the NFL has actually improved dramatically. But as of college football, they've seemed to be pretty stagnant.
right. He was saying, in case you couldn't hear, the Rooney Rule, it did help, and the numbers improved for African American head coaches in the NFL. But it's the disparity. I think it's a minuscule percentage for colleges, and I would say the same thing. There's an issue also, just trying to lump this all together for us, is the same thing with women's sports, where increasingly men are coaching women's sports in college. And I mean, we're talking dramatically. Back when Title IX was signed, when women's sports was not cool, women were coaching, like, I think the numbers are 80 or 90% of the women's soccer teams, and women's basketball teams also about that. Now, women's soccer, it's right around 1/3 of the coaches are female. For women's soccer college programs, 2/3 now are being coached by men. Of course, basketball, we know the Gino Auriemmas of the world, but the reality is that more and more men are getting those jobs coaching women's basketball at BCS schools and at D2, D3. Why? Well, it's because the jobs are plum jobs now. They're paying. So it's kind of a catch-22, right? Because thank goodness the women's basketball team is important here and everywhere else. People care about it, not as much as the men's, but they care a lot more than they used to. Again, it's one of these things where, it's got a long way to go, but we shouldn't compare it to the men's because the men's got a much bigger start. And so these jobs are plum jobs, and now, of course, men want them. And most athletic directors are male, and there's nothing wrong with that, thank God. If I wouldn't be standing here if it were not for men who encourage me every step along the way. So that's not about bashing men, not at all. But what it's saying, though, is that when in doubt, you'll probably hire someone who looks like you, or you got a buddy who whatever. Anyway, we know that story. So we've got the same issue is happening now, and I would say the answer, the reason this is troublesome, some of you might say, hey, let the best person get the job. And I'm not against that, except for this. We do need to look at the future. And for all those young men playing football, who are playing at the high school level, college level, and hope to get to the pro level, obviously a big percentage of them are African American. Not only do we want them to succeed whatever they do as Americans and hope for them to be the best and help our country get better in a million ways, we want to give them opportunities. And one opportunity certainly is to see that you could coach, that is an outlet for you once your days are done. And we know football is a tough game, and a lot of guys get injured, and that's the end. So if you don't see someone, I'm a big believer in role models, and if you don't see someone who looks like you in some position of authority, yes, you know that you could be a coach, but if you don't see it, if you've got 12, 15 white guys coaching you, nothing particularly wrong with that, except what is a young African American man thinking? That's the mindset behind this. It's not some crazed liberal thinking. It's just called being smart. You want to encourage people, and one way to do it, an easy way to do it, is having role models. Same thing for girls. We are now, as I said, we've got millions and millions of girls playing sports. I've got my niece, I'll make it back to her soccer game, a 10-year-old, and she actually has one female coach and one male coach in her little soccer league, and for her team. And I want her, as we all want siblings and nieces and nephews and children and grandchildren, we want them to be able to have these opportunities. I want a girl to be able to see that she have a female coach so she can think, hey, I could do this someday. And when we continue to hire, in the case of the NFL or college football, white men to coach a sport that is increasingly populated by African Americans, when we continue to let men coach girls in women's sports, we're not sending the right message. What's to be done? In many ways, this has to be done at the hiring level. Athletic directors have to just say, this is the right thing to do. I would love to see a Rooney Rule in place for women's sports that would mandate that a university would have to say, you're going to have to interview a woman for this job, although I think that's happening in most places. You can't legislate that. right? The NFL can legislate that because the NFL controls all of its teams. The NCAA, obviously in the news and having a lot of troubles these days, it's got its hands full and overwhelmed with what's going on in college sports. The NCAA is not the one to tell Alabama, okay, you're going to interview, right? That has to be done by this institution. And I'll mention mine, Northwestern, and any number of others. And let's hope that these smart men and some women who are ADs take it upon themselves to say this is important for all the right reasons. And the notion that I can't find a good woman to coach a women's team, or I can't find a good person of color, African American, to coach, that's just not acceptable. It's just not acceptable, because that means we're doing a terrible job, and we've got to do better with the feeder system. That's not necessarily the athletic director's problem here or at any one institution, but that should be something that athletic directors and coaches talk about in their conventions, because we just need to do a much better job. I'll leave you with this last thought, how this impacts in a global scale. U.S. women's soccer, I mentioned Abby Wambach and Mia Hamm. Obviously, that's a very popular team. You can make a case that is the best known women's sports team on the planet, the U.S. women's national soccer team. Soccer's obviously such an important game around the globe. The U.S. women have been dominant. 1999, Brandi Chastain whipping her shirt off, the whole 9 yards. They had a woman coach in 2000, 2004, and they had a man, didn't work out. They hired another woman from Sweden, a woman named Pia Sundhage, won 2 Olympic gold medals for them, and then she moved on, as often coaches do. At the top level, men's and women's soccer, they have these 4 or 5 year stints, and then they move on. That's natural. So Pia Sundhage moves on, goes back to Sweden, actually. And what does this team do? They hire a man. He's a good guy. I know him. He's a fine coach. But they hire a man. The most famous women's sports team on the planet hires a man. And I wrote a column. And what I said was, what a terrible message this sends to this male-dominated sport, macho world of Latin America, right? They don't even think women should play soccer in some of those countries, which is a tragedy because you want girls up and playing and having the physical fitness among all those other reasons I mentioned. And so many countries are not supportive. Here's the United States, which is a beacon. It's the shining light to show people how to do it, to how to have your women's soccer team in many ways be more important than your men's soccer team. Lord knows these countries don't want that. But to say this is what we're doing, and here's the U.S. women's team hiring a man. And what I wrote, following up on your excellent question, what I wrote in my column was that this is a failure of U.S. soccer. I was very pointed. We've got, most of the young women in this room played soccer. Probably most of the young men in this room started out by playing soccer, right? So you think of you, and then think of auditoriums and campuses around the country. So over the last 30 years, what, have we had maybe 30 million girls and women play soccer in this country at some form or other? From little 5-year-old orange wedges to whatever. And we can't find one of them to coach the U.S. national team. Obviously, I'm not talking about the 10-year-olds. But I'm saying that we have not had a feeder system. That is a failure of U.S. soccer, to not understand that they need to get women in the pipeline to be head coaches. And I wrote that. And I don't think they love me for writing it, but I don't care. My guess is that will be the last man ever hired to coach the U.S. women's soccer team, because they need to get women in those positions. So I think it's a valid question. I think it's a fascinating question, and it will be a story for those of you who want to be sports journalists. You will continue to follow this story for both women and girls and obviously people of color, many, many issues. But opportunity is a good thing, obviously, in this country, and your question really hit on that, so thank you.